Just a heads up, I will be going into spoilers in this video, so consider yourselves warned. Alright, so let's get straight to the point. Gunn's Superman did something sneaky. It gave us a good old twist that basically says, hey, remember the whole last son of Krypton sent to Earth to be its protector thing? Yeah, about that. So it turns out it might have been a colonization scheme in disguise. It's like you're adopted and your parents were horrible people. Awesome. And while everyone's been picking apart that plot twist and immediately drawing Omni-Man parallels, because how could you not, we've got bigger fish to fry, brochacho, because barely anyone is asking, so if Clark was supposed to conquer Earth and didn't know, what about Kara? Like, did she get the same memo? And if she did, what's she gonna do about it? Because last time I checked, Kryptonians don't exactly half-ass their plans. They don't send one superpowered baby and call it a day, especially not when they have a backup cousin just chilling in cryostasis. And now that Dick Cock is giving Supergirl her own movie and describing her as more intense, more survivalist, and not exactly Clark, I had a stable planet to grow up on, Kent, I can't help but feel like there's more going on. Maybe the mission wasn't abandoned, maybe it just got delayed, and maybe Kara isn't here to help Earth. Maybe she's here to give it back shots. Wait, she can't give... Anyways, whatever. Now, before we dive into tinfoil hat territory, it's worth pointing out that this isn't some fan theory pulled out of my ass. Comics have been playing with variations of this idea for years. From Red Daughter to New Krypton, Kara's story has always had a little more wiggle room for ambiguity. She's often positioned as someone caught between worlds, Kryptonian by culture, alien to Earth, and never quite sure who she's supposed to be loyal to. And that leaves the door wide open for a more utilitarian version of her character to walk through. Not evil, not power hungry, just someone who takes her heritage seriously enough to think that Earth might need a little direction. And honestly, that's what makes this angle interesting. We've done evil Superman to death, but a Supergirl who sees Earth not as a home, but as a project, we might be cooking. That's the kind of narrative you can build a whole new chapter of the DCU around, especially when it pits two Kryptonians raised under completely different ideologies against each other. Not because they hate one another, but because they don't agree on what their existence is supposed to mean. Before we go any further, I want to ask you guys what you think about this idea so far. Are you into the angle Gunn's taking with Superman and Supergirl, or does it feel like DC's trying a little too hard to ride that Invincible style moral crisis thing? Because Superman stories have always had that whole immigrant made good flavor. You know, the tale of a baby launched from a dying world, raised by decent Earth folks, and ultimately deciding to be the best version of himself because of their influence. You know, Earth propaganda. But realistically, you could slap that arc onto any origin story workshop and walk away with a pretty good grade. But Gunn's Superman kinda tosses a wrench into that, because when Clark steps into the fortress expecting the usual father-son bonding moment, perhaps some hologram nostalgia, maybe a little pep talk about responsibility, what he actually gets is, hey son, hope the genociding is going well, your mother's the old pain in the ass as usual. By the way, I wanted to let you know, make sure you inscribe that logo on your chest onto the planet. Branding is everything, so if they're gonna die, they might as well know who did it. It's pretty much where Clark finds out he might have been a glorified Trojan horse, minus the consent or awareness. And that's what makes this Superman a little more grounded. He doesn't go full fascist, he doesn't try to laser half the population, he just kind of shuts down, like someone who got told their entire life was built on a PR pitch. It also reframes the whole idea of heroism, because Clark doesn't just keep saving people because it's convenient, he does it in spite of what he was supposedly meant to be. He doesn't default to good, he chooses it himself, which, in a genre filled with edgy antiheroes and morally gray demigods, feels really refreshing. And while the plot twist is new, it's not exactly unprecedented. There have been versions of Superman like Red Son, Injustice, Snyder's barely smiling version, where the character has kind of toyed with the idea of rejecting humanity, or at least questioning it, but all of those leaned hard into what if he broke bad roots. What Gunn seems to be doing is asking a different question. What if he was supposed to be bad and chose not to be? And that's a subtle but really significant shift, because it turns Superman into someone who's not just resisting temptation, but actively pushing back against who he was supposed to be. And now you have to ask, If Clark, the guy who grew up with a moral compass baked into every cornfield in Kansas, needed a whole movie to work through this, what happens when someone like Kara shows up with no Kansas, no Martha, no anything, and gets the same message? See, unlike Clark, Kara remembers Krypton. She lived through its fall. She didn't just inherit a culture through bedtime stories or something. So if someone gave her orders before she got put on ice or sent her ship earthbound with a mission embedded in the navigation system, you better believe she'd treat it seriously. She's not just some tourist, she's someone who might feel like the only person left who can finish what Krypton started. She's also older than Clark, at least biologically, which means there's a version of events where Kara doesn't see him as an equal, but as someone who failed. Someone who abandoned the cause, and depending on how you play that, her presence becomes less of a team-up and more of an ideological checkmate. She's not here to fight him, she's here to remind him who they are. Let's talk source material for a second, because while this version of Kara hasn't quite been fleshed out at all, DC has actually been quietly laying the groundwork for years. Kara isn't some blank slate sidekick, she's been a Red Lantern, a dictator's enforcer, a war survivor, a multiverse warrior, you name it. She's probably thrown someone through a planet while doing it. Unlike Clark, who tends to default to Boy Scout, Kara has way more narrative wiggle room to go either way. And honestly, personally, I find her more interesting for it. One of the clearest examples is Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow, the comic the new movie's basically based on. I mean, that's the title. Now in the comic, she's not trying to conquer Earth or anything quite so dramatic, but it does paint her as someone with a much shorter fuse and a lot more emotional baggage. She's angry, she's frustrated, and most importantly, she's exhausted. It's not a villain arc, but it's definitely not the "ah shucks" vibe you get from Clark either. And then there's stories like Red Daughter of Krypton, where Kara gets possessed by a Red Lantern ring and goes full crash out mode. Not because she's evil, but because she's constantly dealing with the emotional whiplash of being a refugee, a survivor, and someone who can literally punch holes in planets. Her arc tends to revolve around control, either losing it or trying to desperately maintain it, which you know is kind of perfect for someone who might get handed a mission to bring order to Earth and decide, yeah, that tracks. There's also the New Krypton arc, where thousands of surviving Kryptonians create a new society, and it kind of becomes a mess. Kara's loyalty gets put through the ringer here. She wants to belong. She wants to be part of something. And when Krypton's ideals clash with Earth's, she's not sure which side to take. And that's a recurring theme. Kara's, not Clark. She's not rooted on Earth. She's always floating somewhere between I want to be normal and fuck it, maybe Krypton was right. And if that's the version Gunn's drawing from, it's not hard to imagine where this might be going. Kara shows up in the DCU, sees a planet in chaos, climate disasters, political implosions, TikTok influencers with way too much power, and goes, yeah, okay, maybe the Kryptonians had a point. And she wouldn't be wrong exactly, she'd just be really pragmatic about it. Now, I know that this version of Supergirl isn't exactly the menace that I'm making her out to be. We did see her very briefly as a drunk, but it also lines up with the fact that she's mourning the death of Krypton, and this is her way of coping with that loss. And so essentially, they're lining it up to be a very compelling idea. Plus, when you consider the rumors that Woman of Tomorrow will lean into Kara's colder, more alien side, there's talk of her not connecting with Earth the way Clark does, of her feeling like she doesn't belong. And if that's the emotional baseline of the movie, then giving her a legacy to uphold, even if it's a little colonizer coded, would make a lot of sense. You see, this thing they're setting up with Clark and Kara, it's not about who can hit harder, it's about ideology. You've got two walking weapons of mass destruction arguing over what Earth even deserves from them. Now Clark's whole deal isn't, I want to be a good guy, it's, I believe this world is still worth fighting for, which suddenly becomes a hot take when Kara lands and is like, are we even watching the same planet? And this setup, it could be DC's version of Civil War, except with much higher stakes this time. Not should we register with the government, but should humans even be on this planet anymore? It also flips Kara's entire role. She's not just the girl version of Superman or his understudy, she's a walking contradiction to everything Clark stands for. She forces him to prove that the choices he made are still valid, that Earth is still worth it, even when someone from his own planet is saying otherwise. And depending on how they play it, Kara could easily end up stealing the whole damn spotlight, because there's nothing more compelling than a character who genuinely believes the opposite of your hero and isn't wrong for it. And if Gunn's smart, which even though he dresses like a weed dealer, he is good when it comes to long-form storytelling, he won't turn it into some obvious punch fest. He'll make it personal, emotional. Kara won't start with a laser blast, she'll start with a question. Something simple, but brutal, like, why do you keep defending a planet that's already failing? And that's absolute cinema. What makes this even more interesting is that Dick Cock already gave this version of Kara a trial run in My Adventures with Superman. And after watching the movie, I got the idea for this video, so I wouldn't be surprised if Gunn's just picking up where that idea left off. She's not evil, don't get me wrong, this isn't Brightburn territory, but she's also not the chirpy, hope is a muscle CW version we had for the past decade. She's more focused, mission first, feelings later kind of thing. In the show, she isn't trying to figure out who she is. She knows, and what she knows is that Krypton had a plan, and she's not exactly here to let it go. That right there makes her feel like the dry run for whatever they're cooking in the Supergirl movie. It was slipped into a show that felt safe enough for nostalgia, but bold enough to slip in a Supergirl who's a little off. She's not evil again, and she's not unstable, just operating on a total different moral OS than Clark. And honestly, that's a little more interesting than just, crashing out. So when Kara finally shows up in live action with the trauma of actually living through Krypton's collapse and carrying that I watched the planet die energy, it's not going to feel like some left field twist. Dick Cock already eased us into this version when the stakes were low. They've set the stage. Kara's not flying in to burn the world down. She's coming to ask why everyone's so desperate to save it. And if the answer doesn't cut it, she might just go ahead and finish the job Clark didn't want to do. Now let's add this layer. Kara might think she's doing the right thing, but what if she's not the only one who thinks that? Here's where it gets interesting. If that whole Rebuild Krypton memo was floating around ready for anyone who booted up the fortress, who's to say Kara's the only one who got it? What if there's more? And suddenly Brainiac might not even be the endgame. Maybe he's the one who shows up to help implement the mission. And Kara isn't even the big threat, she's just the first one. That's where it gets messy, in a good way, because now Clark isn't just resisting a message, he's resisting his own people. He's the one Kryptonian who looked at the Space Empire starter kit and went, nah, I'm good. And that makes him the problem. Not because he's weak, not because he's evil, but because he disagrees. So, the only way this can really go is we have a bunch of other Kryptonians. You get Zod and his gang, Kara, and then perhaps there's other Kryptonian sleeper cell agents that they come across. And then they attack Earth, kind of like they do in the Invincible War. So, look, I've tried my hardest to avoid talking about that, and I'm not gonna go into it, because if you've watched Invincible, you're well aware, and the more we talk about the scenario, it kind of ends up going in that direction. However, I'm very happy about that. I don't care if it's a little derivative. It gives, I was about to say Squirrel Girl, bro. Squirrel Girl gives me PTSD. It gives Supergirl something more to do than just be a backup character, a background character, that's the word I'm trying to say. And I find that it could really take the DCU in a much more interesting direction than leading to the Justice League and then having to fight Doomsday, Superman dies, and then we have all this shit go on. I personally feel that this whole universe should revolve around Superman. And, Gunn's probably thinking about that too. So here's the big question. Why does this idea actually land now, when DC has tried and fumbled the whole grim Kryptonian legacy angle in the past? Short answer, timing and contrast. Long answer, people are over the whole evil Superman bit. We've been served enough stories where the guy snaps, goes rogue, lasers his friends, and turns Metropolis into Detroit. Hell, it's practically a genre at this point. So when Gunn comes in and instead of making Superman a tyrant, gives him a reason to become one and has him not do it, that's way more interesting. It also sets the stage for Kara to walk in and take that role without falling into the usual lazy writing traps. She doesn't need to be evil. She just needs to believe in something Clark doesn't. Suddenly, the conflict isn't about who's stronger or who punches harder. It's about who's right. That's a debate, and that is a story. That's how you turn someone into a meaningful challenge, not just a plot device. And it only works now because the pieces are finally there. You've got a Superman who just got blindsided by his origin, whose entire moral foundation just got a giant crack down the middle. You've got a Supergirl on the way who was literally pitched as more brutal, more intense, less hopeful. You've got decades of comic material that leans into this ideological rift. And you've got an audience that's just tired of seeing big blue Boy Scouts or mustache twirling dictators. They want nuance. They want internal conflict. They want something that isn't just another CGI Skybeam finale. This works now because we've already seen what happens when Superman is perfect. We've seen what happens when he breaks. What we haven't seen, at least not prominently, is what happens when someone else believes in his purpose more than he does. And that's where Kara fits in. She's not the villain. She's just picking up where Krypton left off. And if Clark can't stop her, or even worse, if a small part of him kind of sees her point, then yeah, this stops being just a Supergirl story real quick. And the way it's going, I feel like we might be getting the start of Super Viltrumites, baby. Are you sure? Are you sure? Are you sure? Are you sure? Before I wrap up today's video, I just wanted to ask you guys what you thought about the movie. Give me your ratings. Just, go full detailed. I am very curious to hear what everybody has to say. And, if I had to give it a rating myself, I would say like an 8 or 9 out of 10, probably closer to 9, because while the movie is really good, I feel that certain music choices as well as a couple of scenes should have been left to breathe as opposed to inserting jokes. Now, there were moments where the jokes were fine. They didn't totally overshadow the moment. But yeah, there were instances where I felt like we could have just, left a joke out of there. And I'm glad at least we had that one scene with Pa Kent where they were talking about, what it means to be a hero and generally making your own destiny, right? The whole fucking Invincible, man. So yeah, let me know in the comments down below what you thought, and consider liking and subscribing to the channel because I love making these videos and I just really like talking about nerdy stuff with you guys. It makes my day. And so yeah, at any rate, thank you all so much for watching as always, and until next time, make sure to take care.